Welcome to On the Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsom, and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 91 back after the 1 week break from what we saw at UFC 300. And of course, we are not going to live up to the levels here to what we got at UFC 300 from the card perspective, like pre-fight, or actually what we saw during the event, including that crazy baddest motherfucker Max Holloway finish as well. So we are sort of back down to earth a little bit, back in the apex in Vegas with a card that, look, on paper, it doesn't look that great either. So yeah, it's one of those where, look, it was always going to be tough whatever card followed UFC 300. But here we are. We've got an interesting main event, and we have got some interesting fights, you know, sort of throughout the card. But overall, yeah, it does lack the star quality, of course, to what we got at UFC 300. And in regards to this episode of the podcast, I am feeling a little bit under the weather, struggling a little bit in my voice. Whether you can tell or not, I'm not sure, but I promise you I am. So it's going to be more of a quick fire breakdown podcast. I'll still give a little bit of analysis, but yeah, it's not going to be too in-depth. I do want to obviously get something out for those people that do tune in week out for the predictions, for the breakdowns, the analysis. But yeah, it is going to be a more of a cut down version this week, unfortunately. But just before we get into those breakdowns, as always, if you want to jump into the action on Saturday night, make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got everything all under one package, all under one subscription. You've just got to choose whether you just want to go for one event, pay monthly, or take the annual over 12 months. But you get all the handicapper betting advice, written breakdowns, fun parlays, parlay options so you can create your own parlays, and also the official bets that are directly from myself. And also included, you get Baze AI, our UFC prediction software, which gives a percentage prediction for every single possible outcome of every single fight on every single UFC event. And like I say, all that, the handicapper and the AI in one package. We don't separate it. It's all there for you. Jump into the action if you want to have that little bit of extra fun, try and cash those bets and try and make some money on the card. Do so at MMAplay365.com. But with the intro and the promo out the way, let's get breaking some fights down. And of course, as always, we start with the main event. We've got 5 rounds in the flyweight division. We've got Matheus Nicolau versus Alex Perez. Now, Alex Perez is stepping in on 3 weeks' notice to replace Manel Cap. That was going to be a really good rematch, actually, in my opinion, with Nicolau and Cap. And again, I love these kind of fights over 5 rounds. I think they're much more justified than a heavyweight fight. And the only reason why I say that is because, you know, more often than not, the heavyweight fights aren't seeing 5 rounds. But with these flyweights, although, look, like Nicolau hits hard, and Alex Perez has got a decent submission game, but even though these fighters do finish, there's a higher possibility of it going 5 rounds, and the quality of fighters that we have in the flyweight division is insane. So it's 5 rounds of, you know, real fast-paced, high-quality mixed martial arts, and that's what we love. Now, the first thing everyone's going to talk about, and I'll do the same as well, is the weight cut here for Alex Perez. Obviously, he's coming off that fight with Mokaev not so long ago, and now he's having a second weight cut in a very short period of time. And Alex Perez, look, not every cancelled fight has been his fault, but he is one of the most, what I call, unluckiest fighters in the UFC because of the amount of cancelled fights, and whether that's him missing weight or getting ill potentially because of a weight cut. There is a lot surrounding Alex Perez and the weight cut to, you know, to the flyweight division, to the 125 pound mark, or 126 with the, you know, £1 allowance. But yeah, it's one definitely that you're going to want to keep your eyes on with the scales. And I'm not saying Perez isn't going to do it, but like I say, he's got history, and this is going to be a second weight cut in a very short period of time to fight Matheus Nicolau here. So it's just worth mentioning and keeping an eye on. Now, as for how they both match up, for me, I think it's a difficult fight for Alex Perez. Like, yes, he looked better than anyone has looked against Mokaev. And although I think Mokaev is a super talented fighter, and I think he's going to be in and around that championship level, you know, within the next sort of 18, 24 months, maybe he has that first championship fight, it doesn't quite work out for him, and he has to go back to the well, like I say, maybe a year later after a quick rebuild. But Mokaev's going to be in and around there. However, as of right now, or at least before the Alex Perez fight, Mokaev was still, somewhat unproven. Like, he still had things to show that he hadn't been able to do because of the level of competition that he'd been fighting. And look, he passed the test against Perez, and it wasn't easy for him, but that fight against Perez was never going to be easy because that was his big step up. So yeah, Mokaev is still somewhat unproven is what I'm trying to say, or at least he was before the Perez fight. So yeah, like I say, Perez did look good, but you weren't expecting Perez to go in there and get completely rolled over by Mokaev. He's better than that. But I'll always be really honest, and I just find it really tough to trust Alex Perez. Like, there's moments in fights where, even in fights where he's, he should be really solid, it should be really close and competitive, he just goes out there and there's unforced errors and mistakes, and I just don't know. There's something with Perez where at this level against the highest quality fighters, I just don't think he's quite there. And even when, to try and prove this point, even when you look at the fighters he's beaten in the UFC and under the UFC banner, of course I'm talking about the Contender Series, the fighters he's beaten, Kevin Gray, never got signed to the UFC. Carl John D. Thomas, no longer with the UFC. Eric Shelton, no longer with the UFC. Jose Torres, no longer with the UFC. Mark De La Rosa, no longer with the UFC. Jordan Espinoza, no longer with the UFC. Jose Formiga, no longer with the UFC. So all these fighters that he's beaten, and apart from maybe Formiga, who was in and around the top of that division, were nowhere near that top of the division. And then the fights that he's lost in the UFC, Joe Benavidez, round one, ground and pound loss, and it's like that was the fight where he was like finished twice as well. There was that weird thing where the referee stopped the fight but then didn't stop the fight. Then he goes in against Davison Figueiredo, loses round one guillotine. Then he goes against Pantoja, loses round one rear naked choke. Then he goes against Mokaev, and like I say, that was a better showing, but Mokaev somewhat unproven before the Perez fight, and then he loses that fight via unanimous decision as well. So every time that Alex Perez is fighting a real fighter, in and around the top of the division, he's coming up short. He just can't do it. And Nicolau is that type of fighter at the top of the division. Now, like I say, from a stylistic perspective, I do think Perez has got the wrestling advantage here, but I think that's it. Like, the striking advantage, I think, goes to Nicolau. Although Perez has got a hard low kick, Nicolau's also got a hard low kick. I love the way that Nicolau can fight well moving backwards as well. And in the moments where Nicolau's not got too much activity and people are thinking, oh, just throw something, be active, that's because Nicolau is waiting for his opponent to come to him. That's what he prefers. He prefers his opponent to bring the fight to him. That allows Nicolau to land volume, get his activity levels up, and that's what Perez is going to bring in this fight. Perez will be the one moving forwards, and I think that suits Nicolau as well, especially with the power that Nicolau's got on his counter-striking shots from both hands, the lead left hand, the right backhand. I just think that Perez is going to get clipped in this fight, and even if Perez goes to the wrestling, which I think he will, then Nicolau, in my opinion, has got the better jiu-jitsu, so I think he'll be able to get back up to his feet, and I don't foresee Perez being able to relentlessly wrestle for 5 straight rounds, so there's going to be a lot of moments on the feet striking, and that, for me, is where Nicolau's better, where he's more dangerous. The one weapon that I don't think Nicolau's going to have here is his own offensive wrestling. So Nicolau does like to hit takedowns and get on top of his opponents because, like I said, his jiu-jitsu is one of the best aspects of his game. But Perez's wrestling defensively as well, we saw against Mokaev, it's really top-notch, like it's top draw. So I'd be very surprised if Nicolau actually got Perez down. But if he does, then he's the better grappler on top with Perez on bottom. So yeah, look, I think that the advantage Perez has in this fight is within the wrestling, but once that wrestling takes place and the fight's on the mat, we go into the world of jiu-jitsu, and that's where Nicolau's better. So stylistically, I think it's a tough fight for Perez. I think Perez may be a little bit vulnerable from a damage perspective, from a durability perspective. I think Nicolau brings power as well and is probably going to carry that throughout the entire fight. So for all those reasons, I'm picking Matheus Nicolau to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we're in the light heavyweight division. We've got Ryan Spann versus Bogdan Guskov. Now, talking of fighters that are difficult to trust, we've got Bogdan Guskov. So, look, Guskov, to his credit, is a powerhouse. You can see that he's very well built. He's very well trained from, just being able to distribute his power, and you can tell that he's got a lot of power in both hands. But like I said, it's really difficult to trust him because before he came into the UFC, he was looking like he was a beast in regards to landing a shot, putting his opponents out. But again, you question the level of competition. So he comes into the UFC, he fights Volkan Ozdemir, and man, what a test that is for your first fight in the UFC. Of course, we saw it with the likes of Jiří Procházka. So if you can pass that sort of test, then you know that you're going to be in and around that top of the division. But he didn't, and he looked pretty poor, in my opinion, in doing that. But again, it's a tough test, so you can half give him a pass for that. We just know that he's not going to be in and around the top of the division. So then he goes in against Zach Pauga, and Zach Pauga is a fighter I really don't rate that highly in regards to at this level of the UFC. Of course, I'm not saying he's a bad fighter. Any fighter in the UFC is, an elite fighter, or pretty much every fighter. But yeah, so with Zach Pauga, at this level in the UFC, I just don't think that he's quite there. And I actually picked Guskov to beat him, and I kind of wish I'd bet it now, but shoulda, woulda, coulda. And also the other side of it is, I don't really trust Guskov, so I can't really put my money on somebody that is not trustworthy to me. But I did think Guskov was going to beat Pauga, and he did. He finished him in the first round, and now he's here against Ryan Spann. So again, he's taking a step up in competition. For Ozdemir, massive step up, failed. Then he took a step down against Pauga, passed, and now he's back up to Ryan Spann. And look, I think this is a difficult fight for Guskov, because not only is Spann going to be in and around the striking with Guskov, like I don't think Spann's just going to get deaded in one punch and that's going to be it. Spann's going to be, competitive striking with Guskov. But then where it gets really difficult for Guskov is when Spann starts hitting takedowns or body locks, trips, taking Guskov down to the mat, because Spann's got a really dangerous submission game, especially with the front chokes. And I think that Guskov, if he's taken down here, he's going to have a horrific night, and I think he's probably going to get finished as well. It just wouldn't shock me for Spann to... Look, it doesn't take a genius for a professional fighter at this level and his coaches and his team just to look at the tape of Guskov and know where you win this fight. Like, the gap in skill, the big path to victory is within the jiu-jitsu here. I think Spann can get Guskov down to the mat. I think he can submit him, but even if he doesn't and it's on the feet, it wouldn't shock me for Spann just to, strike well with Guskov, land something straight down the middle and put him out either. So I think Spann's got multiple paths to victory, but the big path to victory is within the takedowns and the grappling, which I think he can hit. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ryan Spann to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Karine Silva versus Ariane Lipski. Now, look, just very quickly, I've got to pay Ariane Lipski her dues, because she came into the UFC with a lot of hype. That's not her fault. And she didn't live up to that hype. She was trading wins and losses, only beating fighters that were really bottom of the barrel. But now, coming into this fight, she finds herself on a 3-fight win streak with some decent wins in those 3 wins as well. And, she's looking like a fighter that is finally starting to become what we thought she was going to be when she made that move from KSW into the UFC. The thing is here, she's got Karine Silva, who is also on an absolute tear as well. And the difference is, I think Karine Silva is just looking so much more dangerous, especially from a finishing perspective. There's going to be some questions asked of, well, what does Karine Silva look like in round 3 in this fight? She doesn't really go past round 1 or 2 into the deep waters, because she's finishing her opponents, and there's a lot to be said for that. But if Lipski doesn't get put out of there, really, what's Silva going to look like in round 3? Well, it's a question that, is going to get answered at some point. However, I just don't think that we've seen any signs of Karine Silva, gassing out and not being able to do anything, even when she's into the round 2s that we've seen. I don't think there's enough footage there to be able to make that decision of, okay, right, she's going to be really tired, she's not going to be able to go 3 rounds. I think she'll be fine going 3 rounds. The only way I think it becomes a problem for Silva is if she's spamming takedowns, relentless takedowns, can't get Lipski down, Lipski's defending, and it's just zapping that gas tank after every single takedown. I think that's the only way that Silva really gasses out going into late round 2, round 3 if it goes that far. But that's not Silva's game. Silva's game isn't relentless takedown, shot after shot after shot. Karine Silva's a decent striker, decent kickboxing fundamentals. You can see that she's, very well trained there. Lipski, on the other hand, Muay Thai background, Muay Thai champion in Brazil. I think Lipski's going to be the more aggressive striker for sure, but I don't think Karine Silva's going to get run through with Lipski or walk onto something that's going to knock her out or anything like that. I just think Lipski's going to be overly aggressive. She's going to land early, I think, on Silva, but within that aggression, I think Lipski is going to open herself up for takedowns, and I think Silva's going to hit the takedowns. When the fight hits the mat, Silva's just an absolute savage on the mat. Even if during a takedown or after the takedown, Lipski finds a way to scramble and ends up on top, Silva's dangerous on top as well. And when we talk about step-ups and levels of competition, Silva had that step-up in competition against Marina Moroz. Marina Moroz has been in the UFC almost 10 years. She's still getting better to this day. She trains at American Top Team. She's actually a training partner of Lipski. And what Karine Silva did to Marina Moroz on that step-up in competition, man, that was impressive. Good striking. Finished the fight with the guillotine at the end of the fight. And yeah, for me anyway, look, Silva's really, really impressive. And what makes this fight better is the fact that Lipski, I think, is finally hitting her prime as well and looking great. So I think it's going to be a fun fight. But like I said, the aggression of Lipski, I think, plays into the path of Karine Silva, because I don't think Karine Silva's going to be too fazed by that aggression in regards to, getting hit from a defensive perspective, and she can use that to get the fight down to the mat. And I think Lipski's going to have a difficult time with Karine Silva on the mat, on top of her. Karine Silva's still active, grappling, gi, no gi as well. So, yeah, I think although this fight is going to be fun in a lot of moments, I do like Silva to win. So for those reasons, I'm picking Karine Silva to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the newcomer Jhonata Diniz versus Austen Lane. Jhonata Diniz coming from a kickboxing background, and you can see that as well. The dude is just so calm and relaxed on the feet, striking. Austen Lane, of course, coming from the American football background. So, he's going to be athletic, he's going to be fast. And look, that's great, but in mixed martial arts, you need more than that. And look, I actually don't think Austen Lane is one of these fighters that's transitioned from another sport and is going to, not be competitive even at the level of the UFC. And the reason why I say that, and the reason why I don't think he should be put into that category is, look, he's 12-4 as a professional, so he's had 16 professional fights, which is more than a lot of fighters in the UFC. And he even went 4-0 as an amateur as well. So he's had 20 mixed martial arts fights across his professional and amateur career. So I think the fact that, he was a former, American footballer, I just don't think that you can say that, okay, he's an American footballer, not a fighter, because I think he's paid his dues in the fight game. In this fight specifically against Diniz, I do think he's going to have a lot of problems, though. Similar problems that he had against Tafa. And that's another thing, he's had a really strange start in the UFC. Obviously, he had the initial fight with Tafa, but the eye poke stopped the fight. And then he rematched Tafa and poked him in the eye again. And we thought that was going to be deja vu, but it wasn't. The reason Austen Lane lost that fight against Tafa is because Tafa has kickboxing experience. He's a lifelong martial artist. He was doing kickboxing before Austen Lane even, went into an MMA gym. And it's the same thing here with Diniz. And I think I think a similar thing's going to happen. Look, Austen Lane's going to start the fight. His movement's going to be okay. He's going to be in and out of range. Again, showing that athleticism and the speed. But eventually, I think Diniz is going to get him. I think that the kickboxing or the striking differential between both fighters, whereas Austen Lane's more of a complete mixed martial artist in regards to not being a specialist in one specific area. Diniz is that specialist in the one specific area, but I also think that Austen Lane's wrestling is probably not going to be enough to get Diniz down? And even if it might be enough to get Diniz down, does Austen Lane risk shooting a takedown from maybe too far out? Does he try to get into that range first? But once he's into that striking range, that's Diniz's world. So I think stylistically it's a difficult fight for Austen Lane. I think he's going to be met with another high-level striker with power, and it's probably going to give the same results as what happened last time. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jhonata Diniz to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the Dirty Bird Tim Means versus Uros Medic. And it's an interesting fight, but it's more interesting from Tim Means' side because, look, Tim Means is a 40-year-old welterweight here with a ton of experience, over 50 fights professionally, has been fighting in the UFC for as long as we can remember. And it's the experience edge is something that's so important, especially against someone like Medic, who is only 9-2 as a professional. So, look, I've literally just mentioned about Austen Lane being 12-4, and that record's greater than some fighters that have only ever done mixed martial arts or a form of martial arts. And again, that's proven here with Medic, because even Medic, he's not transitioned from another sport, and even his record is lesser than a guy in Austen Lane who's come from American football. So Medic, the point I'm trying to make here is Tim Means, the experience gap here is absolutely insane. But unfortunately, what comes with being 40 years old in the UFC welterweight division against somebody like Medic, who is very young in his UFC career, and just in general, Medic is going to have that speed advantage. He's going to have an athleticism advantage, a movement advantage, and also there's less miles on the clock with Medic. So although Tim Means has had a really successful career, he's also will have naturally taken a lot of damage along the way. So those are the two sort of intangibles there that are going to be really difficult to, form a solid analysis here in regards to, which fighter is going to be able to prevail even in the moments that are quite inactive. Because like I say, you've got the experience of Means versus the youthful energy, speed and the movement of Medic. The thing is that makes this fight interesting though stylistically is, does Tim Means wrestle? Because Means comes from a striking background. He's got a lot of knockouts. That was the lot of knockouts were really more towards the earlier side of his career rather than the later side of his career. But he's a very savvy fighter from a fight IQ perspective. But the problem with Means is you never really know when he's going to wrestle. He'll have that game plan, and him and his coaches will know exactly what they're doing inside the cage. But from somebody that doesn't have that information, it's very difficult to know where and when Tim Means is going to wrestle. Does Means come in here and think that he's going to be the better striker? Because if he does and he doesn't wrestle, I think Medic is going to knock him out. But if Means does come in here and he starts to make this fight dirty, ugly, grindy, pin Medic against the cage, try and take him down, and just drain the fight away from Medic, if that's the game plan of Means, then I think he's got a really good chance of winning. But again, I just can't put a lot of stock into that because I just don't know whether Means is going to do it. I just really don't know. And therefore I'm thinking, well, look, if we're going to get a mixed martial arts fight and we are going to see maybe a little bit of wrestling and a couple of takedowns from Means, that's fine and to be expected. But I don't think that's going to be enough to beat Medic. I think Medic will be able to get back up to his feet. I do think that the majority of this fight, or the better work in this fight, is going to be done on the feet striking. And although Tim Means is more than capable, I just think Medic has got the speed, the movement and the power advantage over Means at this stage in Means' career. So I am going to be siding with Medic here. I do think he's got the tools to be able to put Means out, whether that's in the first round or in the third round. Medic has just got that. He's just got that edge in regards to, the finishing upside and the danger of the strikes that's coming from his side towards the 40-year-old welterweight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Uros Medic to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got potentially, arguably, the best fight on the entire card, in my opinion. We've got Jonathan Pearce versus David Onama. And yeah, this is a really, really good fight because, look, from a striking perspective, I think Jonathan Pearce will get absolutely lit up by David Onama. So if this is a fight that's won and lost on the feet striking, I think Pearce is in for a really, really rough night. The difficulty for Onama is that this is not a kickboxing or Muay Thai fight. This is a mixed martial arts fight, and where Jonathan Pearce is good is with the wrestling, the grappling, making things ugly, dirty, grindy. And the one thing you've really got to respect with Jonathan Pearce is the fact that he knows where he's good and he knows where he wants to fight. Like, you look at the Joe Anderson-Brito fight last time out, Pearce comes out straight away in round 2, for example, bang, takedown, before he even throws a strike, or it might have been round 1, I can't remember. At the start of one of the rounds, Pearce just didn't even throw anything, just level changed and shot a takedown. So Pearce knows where he wants to fight, and I do like that about him. Now, the thing is with the Joe Anderson-Brito fight as well, like, that was really unfortunate with Pearce. Look, I had a bet on Pearce, and I feel really hard done by with that. And there's actually a lot of these types of fights that are happening to me lately as well, with the fights that I'm betting on. But look, Pearce went in there. He did lose that first round on 2 judges' scorecards, but straight into that second round, takes Brito down, and at that point, look, he's took the best of Brito in that first round, you know, got into the second round, weathered the storm, and he's just looking at controlling him. And at that point, I'm just sat there thinking, well, this is pretty much easy money now. Like, Jonathan Pearce is controlling and dominating round 2. That's going to zap anything that Brito's got left. He's going to come out in round 3 and do exactly the same thing. But, of course, on one of the stand-ups from Brito, as he's standing back up, he locks in that modified guillotine, that front choke, and, you know, gets sort of like a flash tap from Jonathan Pearce. So, yeah, look, Jonathan Pearce, I feel like what we saw in that Brito fight is what we're going to see here, minus the front choke from David Onama. I think that Pearce is going to go in here. He's going to do exactly the same thing. He's potentially going to have to weather a little bit of a storm as well, because Onama is powerful on the feet, striking. He is fast. He is athletic. So Pearce is probably going to have to do the same thing, and he might even drop that first round. But the thing is with Onama, he can be taken down. He has been taken down in multiple fights, multiple times, and I just don't anticipate a fight here where we don't see Pearce taking Onama down and doing some really good work on top of him. Initially, Onama might get back up to the feet or scramble to the cage and start to make it not so easy for Pearce and make Pearce work a little bit. But eventually, I think the relentless wrestling, the pressure gets to Onama. He'll start to tire out, and Pearce will just slice through him the longer the fight goes on. Like I said, on the feet striking, it's definitely Onama, but I think Pearce just gets to the wrestling and grappling and just tries to get over the line in this fight, back in the win column. That's how I'm seeing the fight going. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jonathan Pearce to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Rani Yahya versus Victor Henry. Victor Henry, the biggest favourite on the card, at like minus 550. Come back on Yahya at plus 400. I said the exact same thing when Julio Arce was favoured over Gilbert Burns, even though Julio Arce actually wasn't a million miles off from covering that massive price tag. But, you know, pre-fight, we can only discuss what appears to be a ridiculously wide line for a mixed martial arts fight when there is a legit path to victory on the other side, and that's exactly what we have here. Do I understand why Victor Henry's the favourite? Yes, absolutely. He's a crazy striker, fast-paced, really unorthodox. He holds power in that striking as well, but also has decent wrestling and grappling. And against Rani Yahya, that's probably going to be an absolute nightmare because, you know, Rani Yahya is at that stage in his career where he's old, he's took a lot of damage, he's not fighting very often. And to be fair, with the Victor Henry side of that is, look, that Victor Henry's 36 years old himself. Rani Yahya's 39, so there's actually only 3 years difference between them. And also in regards to fight experience, Rani Yahya's had the more fights, but again, there's not a massive amount in it. But there's just a difference in both fighters when you watch him. Victor Henry looks like the fighter that's closer to his prime, whereas Rani Yahya looks like the fighter that's declined and not a million miles away from retirement. So although the numbers actually are around the same in regards to age and fight experience, there's just a visual difference between both fighters. So yeah, look, I can completely understand why Victor Henry is the favourite, but a favourite like past minus 500 is just ridiculous, because the one thing Yahya still has absolutely is an elite level grappling game. If he gets on top of Victor Henry, yeah, he has this, you know, Eddie Bravo, 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu style of jiu-jitsu, but Rani Yahya, if he gets on top of Victor Henry, I don't expect Rani Yahya to get swept, submitted. I think he'd make it very difficult for Victor Henry to get back up. It's just Rani Yahya needs to be able to get on top of Henry. Does he have the speed, the movement, and the quickness in his takedown attempts to be able to get Henry down? That's where it gets really difficult to side with Rani Yahya here and make a real justification for taking that small underdog shot, because like I said, that's just not where Yahya's at. His movement isn't that fast. His speed isn't that fast. So, and I think when he gets into range for a potential takedown, Victor Henry is going to have a huge speed advantage, striking advantage as well. So that's where I think it gets difficult. It's just it minus 500, minus 550 or whatever it is that you get in. It's just if Yahya gets on top of Henry, that's where that line is gonna look. You're gonna start getting very, very scared at that line. But in regards to the straight pick and prediction of who I think is going to win the fight, I'm gonna be picking Victor Henry to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Austen Hubbard versus Michal Figlak. Now, Michal Figlak was a fighter that I was so excited to see in the UFC. I was really high on him and his brother as well. He's got a brother, Matheus Figlak, and both of the Figlak brothers, in my opinion, are solid fighters. And I was excited at some point to see them both in the UFC. Now, Michal Figlak comes into his UFC debut in France, I believe, against the Frenchman Perez, and it didn't work out for him. And we've seen this so many times. We don't often see it from Cage Warriors fighters, though. It's more often than not the fighters that are coming from the Contender Series, but we have seen it so often where a fighter is maybe 1 or 2 fights short of being UFC ready, but comes into the UFC after getting a little bit of hype outside of the UFC, and then them fighting a decent fighter on the debut, and then they're favoured massively, but then they don't live up to it and they do fall short, and you think in hindsight, well, actually, yeah, I'm not surprised that that's happened. And that was Michal Figlak's debut against Perez in France as well. But like with Figlak, it's look, I still think he's a good fighter. Like, my stance doesn't change on him. But the problem that we've got for Figlak is he's coming from that Firas fight straight into an Austen Hubbard fight. And although Austen Hubbard is a step down, in my opinion, from Firas, it's not a massive step down in competition, but Hubbard is probably a more difficult fighter to beat than a Firas. Hubbard's like so well-rounded everywhere. He's so well-trained, great training partners, great coaching. He's a fighter that not only, even though he's not a specialist in one specific area, his offense and defensive in every single aspect of mixed martial arts is just really, really like on point, and that's what makes him difficult to beat, because his offensive striking's good, defensive striking's good, offensive wrestling's good, defensive wrestling's good, offensive jiu-jitsu and defensive jiu-jitsu are all good. So even when fighters are a specialist, and we've seen it where, Hubbard's faced like, high-level wrestlers, and they've come in and they might been able to take him down once or twice early, but then Hubbard just stays in the fight, their opponents get worn out, and then Hubbard comes out later and he's just able to defend everything and put his offensive game on. And I think the same thing's going to happen here with Figlak. I think Figlak's going to come into this fight. He's predominantly a striker, although Figlak can mix it up with wrestling and grappling, but I don't think Figlak's offensive wrestling is good enough to get Hubbard down. I think Hubbard's defensive wrestling is better than the offensive wrestling. But in this sport, you can never say never. So if Figlak does take Austen Hubbard down, what's Hubbard going to look like off his back? Well, we've seen it before. He gets right back up to his feet. So I think that Hubbard's defensive grappling is going to be better than the offensive grappling of Figlak. So I think it's going to be a fight where Figlak's going to have more success on the feet. And I think that first round is going to be key. I think Figlak's going to come out. I think he's going to look great. I think he's going to land some nice strikes on Hubbard. But whilst Hubbard's sort of feeling his way into the fight, making reads, he does generally start slow, which is always a danger. But I think Hubbard just builds into this fight like he does against, every other fighter at the level of Michal Figlak. And the other thing with Figlak, we saw in the Xi'an fight, is he can get taken down. And when you do put Figlak on his back, that's where his weaknesses is. Hubbard likes to shoot takedowns. He's not like a relentless wrestler, but he gets a couple of takedowns in most of his fights. And I think if he takes Figlak down once and realises that Figlak actually isn't really doing much and Hubbard Hubbard's offensive grappling is better than better than Figlak's defensive grappling, I think we're going to see Hubbard just go to the well again and again, and just again it could look exactly like we saw in the Farhasian fight. I just feel that, yeah, look, I feel that Figlak's going to have a decent start to this fight, but Hubbard's one of these fighters that is so tricky to beat at this level. Like, if you're a top 10 guy, then yeah, of course you go through Hubbard, no problems, or not no problems, but relatively comfortably. But at this level, like where Figlak's at, these types of fighters are the fighters that Hubbard eats up, and I think we're going to see that again here. So for those reasons, I'm picking Austen Hubbard to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Don'Tale Mayes versus Caio Machado. Now, this is one of these fights. Look, no disrespect, but it's a low-level heavyweight fight, and that's just a fact. Are they heavyweights? Yes, they are. Are they at the top of the division? No, they're not. Are they in the mid of the division? Probably not. So look, I'm not being disrespectful when I say that, but these are two fighters that are at the lower level of the heavyweight division in the UFC, which actually is always an interesting type of matchup, because these low-level UFC heavyweight fights can be very, very fun to watch. They can end up, if both fighters go 3 rounds where they're tired, and it becomes a slugfest. And yeah, like I do like this type of fight. It's very difficult to call though, because like Don'Tale Mayes is a fighter that has shown holes within the wrestling and grappling, although he has also shown developments and improvements lately as well, which sort of does impact the way that I'm siding with this fight. Caio Machado on the other side, he goes in there against Mick Parkin on his UFC debut. That fight's a bit of a mess as well, just like everywhere, kind of sloppy striking, and then there's the wrestling and grappling exchanges. So yeah, look, Machado, although he actually didn't have a terrible showing against someone like Mick Parkin, who was generating momentum and hype himself, again, the fight was a little messy. So you've got this fight between Don'Tale Mayes, Caio Machado. Which way am I siding? Look, I think that from the striking perspective, the speed and athleticism and the power go to Mayes. And then with those slight developments that Mayes is making within the wrestling and grappling defensively, again, how great are those developments? I think we'll find out, because I think Machado will try and shoot takedowns here. But on the feet, at least striking, like I said, I think Mayes has got the power, speed and athleticism here to be able to crack Machado as Machado's coming in to maybe try and close the distance and get the fight down. I think that that's going to be enough at this level for Mayes to be able to take the win. So yeah, for those reasons, I'm picking Don'Tale Mayes to win this fight. Next up, we've got Ketlen Souza versus Marnic Mann. Marnic Mann was brought into the UFC to fight Josephine Knudsen, and yeah, again, I'm just on the fence of whether Marnic Mann is UFC level, UFC caliber fighter. I mean, she's got some qualities in regards to, that Holly Holm type of style where she'll pin against the cage and just try and make it dirty, ugly, grindy. But again, that's not going to be enough at this level of the UFC unless, you're ridiculously strong, durable, and you can, do that to every single fighter. And I just don't think Mann is going to be able to do that to every single fighter in the UFC. And you take Ketlen Souza, for example. I don't think Ketlen Souza is specifically a specialist in one specific area. She's more of a well-rounded fighter where her striking's decent. I like what I mentioned with Hubbard, offensively and defensively sound everywhere. Is Souza going to be one of these fighters that makes it to the top of the division? Again, just like Hubbard, no, I don't think she's going to, unless, there are drastic developments there. But outside of the rankings and fighting ranked fighters, I think Souza's going to be absolutely fine, picking up wins in the UFC and doing well, maybe going on 2-3 fight win streaks, and maybe getting that opportunity to fight a ranked fighter. I don't know where her ceiling's at is what I'm trying to say, but that doesn't matter for the prediction in this fight. Look, I think that Souza's going to have enough here in her toolbox to beat Marnic Mann, because I don't think Mann comes into this fight and either rinses and repeats takedowns and gets Souza down, and Souza gets stuck and can't do anything. And at the same time, I don't think Mann's going to be able to just constantly press Souza's back to the cage and pin her there and run the clock down and win the rounds just by, no activity on the other side of her opponent, in this case Souza. I think there's going to be way more to this fight than that. And like I say, I think Souza's the better striker. I think the wrestling is going to be close, but the grappling, if Souza is taken down, I think she can get back up. But if Souza gets Mann down, I think Souza will do a good job on top of Mann. So, yeah, look, overall, I think it's a difficult fight for Marnic Mann just because Souza is well-rounded and good offensively and defensively everywhere. So, for those reasons, I'm picking Ketlen Souza to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the return of Ivana Petrovic versus Liang. Now, the only thing that I'm really surprised about in this fight is how wide the line is on Petrovic. And this isn't a knock on Petrovic. I actually think that she's probably going to cover a betting line not too far from where she's at. But the reason I'm surprised is because, look, we get this all the time where, again, I've mentioned it in this podcast already, like Petrovic came into the UFC with hype and there was a lot of people, talking Petrovic up, including myself, because I actually really like her as a fighter. And then she fought that, mid to low level UFC opponent on a debut. She was expected to win. She was like minus 225. But then there was a lot of cappers on the other side of her, which did end up cashing. And congrats to those guys. And then in the second fight that fighter comes into, you normally get a real cut price on that fighter. But that's not the case here. Like, Petrovic, like I say, she was a minus 225 favourite last time and she lost, but here she's like a minus 500 favourite. And Liang, although she's a fighter that is very kill or be killed, she'll go out there, she'll, balls to the wall, give everything that she's got, and then if she's great, she'll finish, and if she's not quite there on the night, she'll get finished herself. She's that type of fighter, so I can see why Petrovic is a minus 500 favourite here because of the quality of fighter. Like, Petrovic isn't that type of reckless fighter. She's very calm, composed, and she is technical. But just going back to the Petrovic losing that first fight, I genuinely feel that Petrovic it was just a UFC debut. The debut jitters, I think, were there, and she just didn't give the performance that reflects her as a fighter. I've watched Petrovic outside the UFC. I've commentated on events where Petrovic has been fighting, so I've seen it firsthand. She's so good everywhere. She's a good striker, good wrestler, good grappler. I promise you there is a very, very good fighter in there that we didn't see the first time around in the UFC. Now, as a minus 500 favourite, she's obviously going to be expected to win this fight. But I do think she's going to be tested in some moments as well, because Liang will come out. She will come out hard. She will look for takedowns and try and get Petrovic down. But I just think Petrovic's quality here, again, everywhere, offensively and defensively, is just going to be enough to shut Liang down. And it's a tough one for Petrovic because, like I said, as a minus 500 favourite, you're supposed to be winning this fight. So if she goes out there and looks impressive here, well, she was supposed to, because Liang was, a huge underdog, and that's what's supposed to happen to a huge underdog. So Petrovic is in a situation here where she can't really do right from wrong, if that makes sense. I do feel, though, that Petrovic is going to grow in the UFC. I think she's going to be a fighter that we're talking about in a couple of years' time. And when I'm talking about ceilings and ranked fighters, I think Petrovic is going to be there. And people might not see it now, but there's a very, very good fighter there. I promise you, like a striking's good, wrestling's good, grappling's good, but she's also, young enough in a career that the developments are going to be there from fight to fight as well. So in regards to this fight, yeah, of course, I think that she wins. Do I think that it's going to be like super comfortable with nothing back from Liang? No. I think Liang is going to pose some nightmare scenarios, or just be a bit of a nightmare opponent, not nightmare scenarios. I don't think Petrovic is going to get close to being finished or anything, but I think that Liang is going to be, in the early moments in this fight, just a bit of a difficulty to deal with. But I think after that first round, once Petrovic has got her reads in, she knows what Liang's bringing to the table, I think she takes over. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ivana Petrovic to win this fight. And the final fight we've got to talk about and break down, we've got Maheshate versus Gabriel Benitez. Now, from the outset, I think this is actually a risky fight for Maheshate because it's a big step up in competition from the fighters that he's been fighting. However, he's also on a 2-fight losing streak to Rafa Garcia and to Vyacheslav Borshev. Like, I think I'm not saying Gabriel Benitez goes in there and smashes Borshev and Rafa Garcia. I think he'd beat Rafa Garcia. Borshev maybe a little bit closer, but like experience edge and just like skill set and ability, like Gabriel Benitez is still a very capable fighter. It's just where Maheshate has some advantages here. Is look, Maheshate is like 24 years old. He's so young. He'll be developing from fight to fight. He'll be learning from those 2 losses as well. Whereas Gabriel Benitez is 35 years old, and in this division, that is quite, a decent age to be at. And he's also been in a lot of wars, took a lot of damage, and has been finished on multiple occasions. And that's where Maheshate is going to be dangerous, getting in the face of Benitez, putting hands on him and trying to knock him out. But even still, it's a very risky fight for Maheshate, coming in off a 2-fight losing streak to then fighting Gabriel Benitez. So they must be confident in that Maheshate camp that they're going to be able to beat Gabriel Benitez and take what Benitez has got to offer, which what Benitez has got specifically is these hard kicks. We hear it every single fight that Gabriel Benitez fights, that AKA he's the hardest kicker that anybody's ever seen and harder than Luke Rockhold. And, we hear it all the time. So we know that Gabriel Benitez has got hard kicks, and that's one of the weapons that I think Maheshate's got to be really cautious of, especially the low kicks. But if Maheshate's getting in Gabriel Benitez's face and he's putting hands on him, that alleviates, the kicks, because, at boxing range, that's not kicking range, at least not for most fighters. So Maheshate does reduce the likelihood of Benitez being able to get off on his kicks. What I actually think is going to happen here, though, is I think Maheshate is going to get hit with a few hard shots from Gabriel Benitez, and I don't think Maheshate is going to be phased too much by it. And once that happens, I think Maheshate is going to be able to walk Benitez down, knowing that he can eat his biggest shots and not get knocked out, and just overwhelm Benitez with forward pressure, aggression, being in his face, and just landing shots inside that real close boxing range. And I think eventually what's going to happen is Maheshate is going to catch Benitez with a couple of punches that sort of maybe hurts him or just like rings the bell a little bit, and then Benitez will go against the cage, maybe start to shell up. Maheshate will start to throw punches and the referee will stop the fight. I think that's what we're going to see here. I think if Maheshate stays at kicking range with Benitez, I think his legs and his body get beat up, and there's a chance Benitez lands a head kick as well. But that's not Maheshate's game, to stick on the outside at kicking range. I think Maheshate will be coming forward, and once he realizes that, or if he realizes that he can take Benitez's best shots and not get hurt or knocked out, I think the respect will just be gone at that point, and Maheshate will be free to overwhelm Benitez. So for those reasons, I'm picking Maheshate to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. I've tried my best to get through it all without feeling too rough. So thank you all for tuning in, as always, whether you're listening on YouTube or one of the podcast platforms. Of course, if you are on YouTube, please drop a subscription to the channel, because it really does help more than you might realise. And once again, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend from a betting perspective, of course, it's a slim card in regards to star quality. So if you are wanting to add that little bit of excitement and try to win some money, pay for, your missus to be taken out for the weekend, or whatever it is that you like doing, then make sure you go on to MMA Play 365, where you'll get everything in one package, all your handicapper betting advice from myself, along with Baze AI, our UFC prediction software, all those predictions in the same place. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again next week.